My pleasure to have you today, listener. How has your belief in standing firm, maybe that core idea you hold on to, actually turned into a dangerous, accelerating rigidity? One that's silently ensuring your path toward failure. Welcome to Enchanted Life Inside. Today, well, we're not just exploring sources, we're actually entering the wreckage of a really profound paradox. It's something that I think stalks every leader, every driven individual, really. We're examining the rigidity trap. Why is it, why does the seemingly strongest person, that one who just refuses to compromise, stands tall, defiant, above the storm, why are they often the one who falls first? And, well, falls hardest. This story, it's the story of the mighty oak, and honestly, it destroyed everything I thought I knew about strength. It's a chilling warning, really, unmistakable. I want to take you inside that failure, right inside. This deep dive, it starts with the voice, the perspective of an entrepreneur, a leader, someone who built his business, his whole reputation, his entire self-identity, really like an oak tree. Tall, strong, seemed unshakable, right? And his core belief system, what he genuinely thought was his greatest virtue, was that real leadership meant this unwavering certainty that resisting change was, a good thing, a virtue. And that adaptation, flexibility, well, that was just weakness, embarrassing even. He lived by that mistaken ethos. And then, well, the collapse came. And it wasn't like a slow crumbling, no. It ended with a phone call, cold, clear, unceremonious. It was the investor, the final judge of value, the arbiter, confirming the end, the demise. The language, it wasn't about market forces or bad timing, not really. It was personal, explicitly citing rigidity. The investor just laid it out. You were too rigid, too certain about yourself. The market changed and you refused to bend.
It truly is the sharpest irony, isn't it? That very quality, this leader champion, that unwavering conviction like granite stability, he actually meticulously crafted it into the mechanism of his own downfall. When we really break down that mindset, the idea that adapting equals weakness, we see it's a fundamental misunderstanding, a critical one. About resilience itself, we'd often mistake just standing still, stasis, for stability. But real strength, the kind that lasts, it doesn't come from just resisting every push from the outside. No, it comes from having the capacity to absorb pressure, to redirect it, and then, crucially, to integrate it, to learn from it.
Exactly. And what makes this story feel so unsettlingly real is that the final collapse, it wasn't just one big unforeseen disaster. It was preceded by, a whole history of small failures. Avoidable ones, a steady stream of warnings, internal warnings that were just dismissed. We tend to focus on the big crash, the spectacle of the ruin, right? But the failure, it really begins much earlier, in the silence of ignoring those first cracks. Let's unpack that history, those ignored warnings. Because this is where the lesson gets really personal, I think, for everyone listening. Over the last 2 years, this leader, he faced this constant barrage of minor setbacks, each one pretty easily correctable, honestly, yet each time he rejected the need to change. He lost several key clients, anchor clients, not because the product itself was bad, fundamentally flawed or anything. No, it was because he absolutely refused to adjust it, to tweak it to meet what his clients now needed, their evolving needs. He just clung to the original vision, the perfect fixed vision.
And what's so crucial to understand there is the dynamic when the feedback actually came in, how he reacted. So when his own marketing team, the internal team, brought him data objective numbers, verifiable figures showing, engagement plummeting, clear signals that a pivot was necessary, he didn't just reject the data. No, he made it personal. He turned it into a conflict. He dismissed the employees who brought the bad news. He actually labeled them, called them weak or unable to handle the pressure. The data itself felt like an attack on his identity.
And that specific phrase, unable to handle the pressure, that just screams rigidity, doesn't it? Just as you pointed out.
It does, absolutely, because really it's an external projection. It's pushing something internal outwards, a deep fear usually. The real issue wasn't their capacity to handle market pressure. It was his capacity, or lack thereof, to handle the objective truth, the truth that contradicted his fixed view of reality. So by dismissing those warnings, the leader was, in effect, actively cultivating this internal void, this hollowness. He was so focused, intensely focused on keeping up that solid, unmoving exterior, the oak's appearance of total control, that he completely missed the rot setting in underneath, the disconnected core. There was no real connection to the ground truth anymore, not the market, not even his own team's state. Accountability, well, that got sacrificed completely on the altar of just appearing certain.
Wow. And if that internal decay, that sort of systematic erosion, wasn't deadly enough, the external world, the environment he was so convinced he could just bully into submission, well, that delivered the final blow. Sudden, unavoidable, a catastrophe. The market didn't just shift gradually. It slammed shut because of an immediate, binding regulation.
Oh.
And how did our rigid leader handle the signals, the whispers before the storm? He dismissed it. Dismissed the impending new regulation as just temporary noise. That's the quote, temporary noise. He saw it as, a minor hassle, something that real leaders, the strong ones, could just push past, ignore, maybe negotiate their way around. He was absolutely certain his position was unassailable.
And that certainty, that absolute conviction was precisely his undoing. That temporary noise he refused to engage with, refused to plan for strategically. It instantly, overnight, rendered 70% of the entire company's revenue stream legally non-viable, gone.
70%. Just think about that. The speed of that. Legislative incineration. One moment you're standing tall, you're criticizing your rivals, the adaptable ones, for constantly pivoting, changing. You believe you've built this superior fixed model. And the next moment, 2/3 of your entire enterprise is just wiped out legislatively. Not by a competitor, but by the very forces of order, of regulation that you dismissed as just, transient, temporary.
And this is really where the story shifts, doesn't it? It moves from being a purely personal tragedy, although it certainly is that, to becoming an essential, universal warning. A caution in the context of modern corporate risk. Because the leader's catastrophic failure, his inability to anticipate or even respect regulatory change, it's precisely the central challenge that strategic compliance teams today are built for. It's what they're tasked to prevent. They are, in a sense, the organization's barometer for flexibility. And we have hard data on this. If we look at the Thomson Reuters Risk and Compliance Report, it confirms it. It shows the operational environment that all organizations, large and small, operate in today is defined by escalating global volatility and, quote, ever-shifting regulatory changes. This volatility, this constant change, it's not some temporary phase we're going through. It's the new normal. It's structural. So that rigid mindset, the one that views regulations or market shifts as just temporary noise, it's not just dangerous anymore. It's functionally obsolete in this era. It just doesn't work.
Right. And maybe we should define that a bit more. When we say escalating global volatility, what does that really mean for the listener? We're not just talking about, say, minor tax law changes, are we? What makes it so complex?
Oh, it's much broader than that. It's really multifaceted complexity. We're talking about rapid geopolitical shifts. Think about sudden sanctions changes overnight, or shifts in rules around data sovereignty, privacy requirements like GDPR, or, localized versions popping up everywhere, things that can instantly halt cross-border operations. It also includes things like supply chain opacity. Trying to trace regulatory compliance across dozens of countries becomes incredibly difficult. So for the rigid leader, this environment just feels like chaos, like something to resist. But for the flexible organization, the adaptable one, it's seen differently. It's seen as a dynamic system, something to be mapped, understood, and managed.
And it's critical then to underscore how organizations are responding, how the successful ones are shifting, because that tells us exactly what our leaders should have been doing, right? Instead of just resisting.
Absolutely. The Thomson Reuters report highlights this fundamental strategic shift very clearly. Nearly half the specific number is 48% of the respondents noted this recent trend. Compliance is moving away from being just a traditional check-the-box activity, just an administrative cost center, something you have to do. It's now occupying a much more strategic, integrated position within the company. Risk management isn't just about avoiding fines anymore, though that's part of it. It's now recognized as a strategic partner. It's tasked with ensuring the organization is stable, resilient, and can even maximize growth despite all this pervasive complexity. It's about thriving in the complexity.
So the resilient, the truly modern company is explicitly focused on the exact opposite of what our rigid leader was doing. They're investing heavily in their capacity to bend, to adapt.
Precisely, yes. The top strategic priorities for these modern compliance and risk teams, looking ahead 12 to 18 months according to the report, they're not about standing still, they're not about doubling down on old ways. No, they're explicitly focused on keeping up with rapid regulatory and legislative changes and proactively mitigating emerging risks. That's the very definition of anticipatory flexibility, being ready before the storm hits. When you ignore that focus, when you cling desperately to a fixed certain business model, you're essentially guaranteeing, it's almost inevitable, that one of these ever-shifting changes is going to collide head-on with your certainty. And, well, sign your corporate death warrant.
The lesson seems starkly clear. If the world outside is dynamic, constantly changing, then the internal structure just cannot afford to be static. It has to mirror that dynamism. And that brings us right back, doesn't it, to the psychological core, the human element behind all this. Because when that external catastrophe finally hits, the default rigid response is almost always the same. Double down, push harder on the fixed path.
That's often the most heartbreaking part of these stories. That rigid attempt to just push harder, to try and force the world, the regulations, the investors, even competitors, to somehow comply with the leader's fixed, preconceived vision. It only accelerates the collapse. It makes it worse, faster. You simply cannot negotiate with a regulatory environment that has fundamentally changed the rules of the game. It's moved on. That effort, that striving to exert control over something that is fundamentally uncontrollable, that's what really defines those final tragic moments of the oak tree, just before it snaps.
And that leads directly to that moment. That moment of terrifying realization captured so powerfully in the narrative source we looked at, what psychologists might term the ego death.
Right.
The leader, stripped bare, certainty gone, company gone, is forced, finally, to confront the deep self-deception. What if my refusal to bend? What if it hadn't been strength at all? What if? What if it was just fear?
It is the ultimate moment of vulnerability, isn't it? And it peels back the layers to reveal the true, often painful root of rigidity, especially in leadership roles.
Tell us more about that psychological root. Because, this isn't just about CEOs, right? This affects everyone to some degree.
Oh, absolutely. From a psychological standpoint, this kind of rigid thinking, this inability to bend, it's almost universally rooted in the fear of admitting you were wrong. Think about the internal weight of that. The crushing cost. It's the terror, really, of looking weak, of appearing uncertain, or crucially, of having to admit that you don't actually have all the answers, despite perhaps projecting that you do. And in a leadership position where perceived certainty is so often and tragically mistakenly equated with competence, that fear can become overwhelming, insurmountable. The leader constructs an entire identity, a whole persona, around the premise of being right, of knowing the way. And this self-imposed barrier, it creates this negative behavioral feedback loop because the internal terror, the fear of admitting weakness, prevents the necessary change, the adaptation. The person is then forced to defend their failing position even more fiercely at all costs. So ironically, that very fear, the fear of admitting fallibility, becomes the central block, the barrier that prevents the flexibility that would actually lead to real long-term strength and survival.
Wow, so the ultimate failure here, the deepest failure. It isn't just the money lost or the company folding, it's that unbearable, quiet realization, the self-sabotage. It's knowing in that final hollow moment that the failure wasn't just bad luck or external forces. It was avoidable, entirely avoidable, because you chose ego, that fear of seeming wrong, over the objective truths, over adaptation, over survival, essentially, okay? We spent, I think, sufficient time standing here amid the ruins of that rigid oak, feeling that cold air of certainty's failure. It feels like time now to shift our focus entirely, to pivot towards the solution, the model of enduring strength that this leader, and frankly all of us, really need to learn to emulate. We turn now to the bamboo lesson, moving into a calmer, more instructional phase of our deep dive here.
Yes. If the oak represents strength through sheer unyielding mass, through defiant resistance, then the bamboo, it represents strength through integrated flexibility, through yielding. This is the profound principle we really need to internalize. The bamboo that bends is stronger than the oak that resists. It's a classic piece of wisdom for a reason. True strength isn't just about standing tall and refusing to budge when the wind blows hard. No, it's about maintaining deep, strong, reliable roots. Think of those as your core values, your fundamental mission, while allowing the canopy, which represents your strategy, your tactics, your daily output, how you present yourself, to move fluidly, to yield precisely with the force of the storm, without breaking.
And this isn't just a nice metaphor, is it? This bamboo lesson. It's grounded in actual behavioral science. It's backed up by, decades of research into what actually allows people not just to survive, but to flourish after they experience profound failure. The key, as revealed in those studies from the University of Texas at Austin we looked at, lies in the necessity of behavioral flexibility, especially when facing insurmountable loss.
That's a critical point. And the UT Austin research, especially the work by Roche and his colleagues on how people adapt after failure, it provides the scientific backing, the mandate for flexibility. This research directly challenges that simplistic, often harmful, rigid ethos of never give up, no matter what, the kind that often defines the unsuccessful approach. The finding was unambiguous. Successful self-regulation requires flexibility. And crucially, this specifically includes the capacity to disengage from goals that are no longer attainable. Clinging desperately to a dead goal, or like in our story, a fixed business model that's been made obsolete by law, that's not persistence. It's not strength. It's actually a profound act of self-harm. And it's rooted in that same rigidity we've been discussing.
And the research went further, didn't it? It didn't just look at survival. It analyzed what actually leads to flourishing afterwards. Things like finding meaning in life, authenticity, real personal growth after a major failure. The first component seems to address the emotional side, which is exactly where our rigid leader, well, always trips up.
Exactly. The first pillar is what they call cognitive and emotional acceptance. Accepting the event, the failure, and its painful aftermath. We're often culturally conditioned, aren't we, to believe that growth means immediately feeling better. Look on the bright side, get over it. But the UT Austin research, particularly on pages 24-25, shows the opposite is true for genuine flourishing. It requires actively allowing and acknowledging the negative emotions, the disappointment, the sadness, the grief, even the anger. Trying to suppress it, or that sort of forced cheerfulness society sometimes pushes, is actually harmful. It's unsupportive of real growth. If you're rigid enough to deny the pain, you completely miss the lesson embedded within it.
That makes so much sense, both logically and psychologically. If you shut down the negative emotion, you're essentially suppressing the signal, the data. You're shutting down that internal feedback loop telling you something fundamental needs to change. The pain is the messenger, isn't it?
Precisely. The emotional pain is your internal system screaming for attention, signaling that change is required. And this acceptance needs to extend inward too, to what psychologists call self-acceptance. This is that counterintuitive paradox that Carl Rogers, the great humanistic psychologist, highlighted so well. True, lasting change doesn't start with self-criticism or beating yourself up. It begins when we grant ourselves what he called unconditional positive regard, when we accept ourselves as we are right now, flaws, mistakes, failures, and all. Rogers' famous quote captures it perfectly. The curious paradox is that when I accept myself as I am, then I change. If the rigid leader from our opening story had practiced that, accepting his own fallibility, accepting the mistake inherent in his rigid business model, he could have initiated change. Systemic, flexible change, long before the market or the regulations forced it on him so violently. Self-acceptance, paradoxically, is the fertile ground from which sustainable adaptation grows.
Okay, so that establishes the crucial emotional and cognitive foundation. Acceptance. But flourishing isn't just about feeling your feelings, right? It also requires moving forward. Which brings us to the second component, the behavioral one. And arguably, this one's the most critical.
Yes, arguably the most critical for long-term flourishing. The second pillar is behavioral re-engagement. The studies demonstrated this quite definitively. This factor, the capacity to identify and pursue a new meaningful goal after you've disengaged from the old unattainable one, was the single most important predictor of subsequent psychological flourishing. Finding that new direction.
So it's not just about picking any new goal then. It's not simply switching focus randomly. It's about fundamentally switching your orientation, the why behind the goal.
It absolutely is. The nature of the new goals matters immensely. They need to be intrinsically meaningful. They need to reflect your core values, your truest self. There's an analogy often used in the UT Austin papers referencing Colonel Kurtz from Apocalypse Now, actually. It illustrates this shift. It's the shift away from seeking purely extrinsic status, like, say, going for general, achieving some external title, a specific financial valuation, hitting a certain number, towards pursuing intrinsic fulfillment. Going for oneself, as the analogy puts it. It's about aligning your daily actions, your efforts, with what feels genuinely authentic internally, rather than chasing external validation or approval.
The failure itself, then, it serves this profound, almost evolutionary purpose in that context.
Exactly. Failure becomes crucial because it forces reflection. It mandates a core reevaluation. It makes a person strip away the external stuff, the veneer, and really assess. Is my current work, is this path I'm on, truly reflecting my authentic core self, my deepest values? Without that forced reflection, without the, frankly, devastating emotional distress of the oak falling, most people would just persist rigidly on the wrong path. Why? Inertia, status quo, external momentum. It's easier to keep going. Failure is the catalyst. It disrupts that inertia and forces the alignment. It can be the beginning of a journey toward a truly authentic life, driven by internal meaning, not just external success metrics.
That completely reframes failure, doesn't it? The purpose isn't just to teach a small tactical lesson, don't do X again. It's potentially to serve as this high-velocity catalyst for profound core alignment. Failure, paradoxically, might actually be necessary to achieve enduring authenticity and real meaning in life. Amazing. Okay, let's take this bamboo lesson, this whole concept of mandatory flexibility, proactive acceptance, finding new meaning. Let's take it out of the psychological studies for a moment and translate it back into the hard reality of the corporate world again. We saw how rigid certainty destroyed a business in our opening narrative. How did the truly adaptable organizations, the bamboo-like ones, actually manage that escalating volatility we discussed earlier? How does it look in practice?
They essentially translate that emotional and psychological flexibility we talked about into high-level operational flexibility. It manifests in their structures and strategies. The Thomson Reuters report again details exactly how companies are adapting to this explosion of regulatory scrutiny and global complexity. It's quite practical. For example, rather than just rigidly resisting the sheer volume of new regulations, adaptable companies manage the complexity by increasing role specialization. That was cited by 57% of respondents, and they're adopting sophisticated technology-driven solutions. That was 53%. Think about what that means day to day. Specialization means you don't have one single rigid leader trying to grasp everything, which is impossible now. You divide the pressure, you bring in targeted expertise, someone focused just on data privacy, another on sanctions, maybe a team on ESG. And the technology piece, things like AI-powered tools that map regulatory changes across dozens of countries in real time, allows them to bend quickly, to react almost instantly. They're effectively outsourcing the complexity or managing it with tools, allowing the canopy of their organization, their operations, to be instantly flexible while their core mission, the roots, remain stable.
That sounds like they're building systems that don't just accept change, but actually anticipate it, almost welcome it as data, which is, the complete antithesis of the oak mindset, just bracing against the wind.
It absolutely is. And what's particularly fascinating right now is the clear global disparity you can see in this flexibility, especially when you look at emerging but incredibly high-stakes risks like environmental, social, and governance criteria, ESG. This provides a perfect, real-time illustration. You can literally see the corporate oak versus the corporate bamboo playing out on a global scale with ESG.
Okay, tell us more about that contrast, because ESG feels like the quintessential example of something that maybe started as temporary noise to some, but quickly morphed into an unavoidable, non-negotiable requirement from regulators, investors, and customers.
Absolutely. It's a prime case study. The report shows jurisdictions like the United Kingdom, often aligned with more proactive European policies, demonstrating a clear bamboo approach to ESG. 40%, that's 4 out of 10, UK respondents report having dedicated ESG departments or specific teams. That's significant investment. Furthermore, they are twice as likely as North American companies to be actively engaging with external stakeholders, talking to investors, NGOs, customers about defining and managing ESG issues. They're yielding to these social and regulatory wins early on. They're treating ESG considerations as integral data inputs for strategy, not just external distractions or compliance burdens.
And how does that compare to the North American response, the presumed home of standing firm?
Well, the North American response, at least in this specific context as captured by the report, often reflects more of that rigid oak strategy, kind of hoping the storm will pass or they can deal with it later. Only 24% of North American companies reported having dedicated ESG teams. That's quite a bit lower than the UK's 40%. And perhaps even more striking, 30%, nearly a third, reported having no external stakeholder engagement on ESG issues at all, just silence. They appear to be resisting the input, delaying significant investment, maybe hoping the pressure will just dissipate or they can catch up later.
But the cost of that delay, the cost of that rigidity, waiting until the regulation finally lands or the investors demand it, that must be enormous, right?
It's potentially exponential.
Yes.
By resisting, by delaying, they are building up massive future vulnerability. And it's not just about potential regulatory fines down the line, it's major reputational risk, it's significant investor risk. When major institutional investors start divesting from companies based on poor climate risk disclosure, which is a common ESG component, the company that delayed, the one that treated it as noise, suddenly faces a crisis, potentially comparable in impact to that 70% revenue loss we saw in our opening story. The UK companies, by embedding flexibility early, by engaging proactively, they're mitigating that future shock. They're building resilience. Their North American counterparts, at least in this specific area highlighted, seem to be exhibiting the same kind of perhaps arrogance or maybe just wishful thinking that led to the collapse of our individual leader believing certainty and waiting is somehow safer than adapting proactively. So bending early, engaging proactively, accepting the complexity, even if it's uncomfortable, that's the difference between organizational survival, maybe even thriving, and facing a sudden, completely avoidable crisis down the road. It really is strength through yielding. And just tying this back one final time to the psychological level, because these individual and organizational patterns, they really do mirror each other so closely. The UT Austin data provides one last powerful confirmation. The findings actually suggested that failures which were characterized by some level of emotional distress, feeling the pain, were associated with higher subsequent meaning in life. There was a quadratic effect, meaning a moderate amount was better than none or too much. You don't win, you don't find deeper meaning. By standing firm, stoically pretending nothing's wrong, dismissing the market shifts or the personal failure as just temporary noise. You win, both personally and corporately, by acknowledging the force of the wind, by allowing yourself to feel the pain of the fall, and then, crucially, letting yourself move and adapt with it, using it as fuel.
You have to accept the gravity of the fall to ever truly harness the energy needed for the rebound. That acceptance, that vulnerability, is the ultimate act of humility required for real, lasting strength. Okay. We've heard the compelling story of the leader who built his fortress on certainty, and we've reviewed the behavioral science, the corporate science, that really confirms his rigid choice was practically guaranteed to fail in our dynamic world. The choice, listener, is immediate for you. It's now. The decision between ego and survival, between the oak and the bamboo, it has to be made now, today. Not when the storm has already arrived and maybe rendered 70% of your current path obsolete. Because when the pressure hits peak, when that regulation is finally filed, when the market irrevocably shifts, it's already too late to start planting new flexible roots. You need them already established. So be honest. That persistent, maybe deep-seated need you feel sometimes to appear certain, to keep standing firm, even when evidence mounts against your position, was it deep down rooted in fear? Just be honest with yourself. That internal terror of looking weak, maybe appearing uncertain, or God forbid, maybe you didn't actually have all the answers. What core belief, what seemingly unshakable principle that you held on to, are you finally ready to bend? Ready to maybe disengage from, to make room for genuine, adaptable strength? Don't let your refusal to bend become the epitaph written on the tombstone of your ambition. I really want you to reflect deeply on that question. And we want to hear from you. What are you choosing to let go of to make room for that authentic bamboo-like strength? If this message resonated with you today, if you feel ready to make that pivot to embrace the principle of the bamboo, take a moment right now, go down to the comments and just write, "I choose bamboo." Let us know that this deep dive reached the right people. And please share any thoughts you have. It genuinely helps the channel Enchanted Life Inside improve and better serve you on this journey together. And of course, remember to subscribe to Enchanted Life Inside. That way, you'll keep up with new content designed to help you navigate these profound, often tricky paradoxes of modern life and leadership. I'll leave you with this final thought, this resonant reflection, echoing the wisdom we've uncovered together today. Victory, real victory, doesn't come from standing tall, rigid, defiantly fixed against the unstoppable forces of change. It comes from learning how to yield, how to bend, how to adapt. Look inward for a moment. See that silhouette, maybe, of a lone leader surviving the storm, standing not in a broken forest of snapped oaks, but standing resiliently among the yielding, whispering bamboo. You don't win by standing tall. I look forward to seeing you again soon, exploring more of these ordinary things that happen every day, but are, well, very much worth thinking about. My name's Eli, Eli. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.